The next part of this correction to accept everything and never resist or rebel is a refutation of this concept of that which resists persists. When I was trying to explain to people what this original teaching is about, is resisting the truth. And if you resist the truth, you're going to continue to receive more of what you got as a result of resisting it. So the better way of saying this, which is more clear and true to the original teaching, is that which manifests as a result of what you are wrongly resisting is that which will persist, is that which persists. So you've been resisting this teaching. You don't want to know the truth. And you've been getting this particular result that is suffering. You don't want that suffering. Well, then you have to stop resisting what you have been wrongly resisting. And as a result of that resistance to truth, you've been generating self-inflicted suffering, and it is continuing to persist for as long as your resistance to the truth persists. That's what was originally meant by what has come down in a totally watered down, nonsensical state as what you resist persists. It's just total nonsense, that statement. That which has been manifesting as a result of what you have been wrongly resisting is that which will continue to persist. Understand that. Understand it. You may need to read it a few times or hear it a few times. That which has been manifesting in your life as a result of what you have been wrongly resisting, meaning the truth, meaning the understanding of natural law, has been resisted and rejected and ignored. Okay? The result that you've been getting because you've been ignoring those things, because you've been resisting that truth, is what will continue to persist. That's what was the original teaching. All right? So I put here the example that natural law is like a huge locomotive. And what people are like is, this futile moron who's going to stand on the tracks when this is getting ready to mow him down at, 150 miles an hour. And he's going to try to put his hand up and he's going to stop that. Because that's what real resistance to truth is. See, we need to resist evil by accepting truth and natural law and the laws of morality. That's how we resist this great evil that is upon us. What we're doing, though, is we're saying, no, we don't want to learn that. We don't want to do the work that's required to learn that from the level of conditioning that we're currently in. No, we're just going to put our hands up. We're going to slap the gift that the Creator is offering to us through the knowledge of natural law right out of the Creator's hand. So let me slap that out of your hand, smack you in the face, and spit in your face. And we think we're not going to get run down. Once again, folks, good luck with that. Enjoy what you get as a result. Well, apparently you've been enjoying it. You want slavery to continue. Most people. So my hint for people, my advice would be, don't be that guy who's just going to stand out on the tracks in front of the locomotive with his hand out thinking he's going to stop it at full speed. You're going to get run down. And it's already happening. It's not going to happen. We're getting run down. We are getting steamrolled by a locomotive called natural law. The Natural Law Express. So the next part of this refutation to this New Age deception number 5 of accept everything and never resist, one of the parts of it was don't actually resist evil. Just let it run rampant. Don't ever physically do anything to stop somebody who is violent and has no right to do what they're doing. They're a perceived authority figure. Oh, they have the right to do this. There's never a time to physically rebel. There's never a time to physically use force. And what this is all about is a complete lack of understanding of the two principles of enlightenment, what I call the 2 pillars of enlightenment. Enlightenment is based on the blending or the synthesis, the coming together in sacred union of the sacred feminine energies and the sacred masculine energies. If either one of these principles or forms of energy are not understood, not worked with, not combined, you have imbalance, and therefore the structure cannot stand, because it needs the support of both of these pillars. The sacred feminine principle, or the feminine pillar of truth, or the pillar of one of the pillars of enlightenment. And again, both of these have to be present to create the structure. The sacred feminine principle is called the non-aggression principle. This is knowledge that that everybody basically should already have, but unfortunately don't. That it is always wrong to initiate coercive usage of force, to constrain, compel, or usurp someone else's rights when you have no right to be doing that. Do not initiate harm or violence against your other fellow beings. That's it. Real simple. And people say they inherently know this, but their actions betray them because they still support government, which is the initiation of violence against other people who have not done anything wrong. Anybody who would say government has the right to pass this law and these enforcers have the right to enforce this law, like what was just done to us in Philadelphia, don't understand the non-aggression principle. Violence was used against us when we used no violence against anyone. They were the aggressors. They were the initiators of force. We initiated no force against any other living being. No one can ever make that claim and make it true because it didn't happen. Therefore, we had every right to take that action, yet violence was used to stop us from taking that action. And what I would say is defensive use of force would have been a right. Unfortunately, we have so many brainwashed people that they would think you can never use defensive use of force. It absolutely would have been a right to exercise. I chose not to exercise that at that point because people's minds are still so controlled that they don't understand that's a right. But more and more people are starting to come together and understand the sacred masculine principle, which is what the New Age movement is trying to suppress in other people. And here's what it is. When I say the suppression of the sacred masculine, I mean the sacred masculine principle of self-defense, which is an inherent natural right of man, of humankind, of humanity. When violence is being conducted against you and the person is not in the right, violence means you're not in the right. There's no form of right violence. There's a form of something called the right usage of force in a defensive capacity, but there is no such thing as the right usage of violence. Using violence is always wrong. Because violence as a noun comes from the verb to violate. What you are violating when you are taking someone and putting them in under violence, when you are doing violence to somebody, you're violating their natural rights of life, freedom, and property. That's what you're violating, which you have no right to be violating. So people don't understand the difference between the self-defense principle, the usage of force in a defensive capacity, and violence. And I'll tell you what, I'll say this statement, and I guarantee you more people who are listening to this than not, if they've gone this far, and again, like I said, this might go into 8 hours. Okay, it's going to take as long as it takes. More people than not will hear what I'm about to say and totally reject it and say, I'm wrong, and they know the difference between violence and force. So let's look at the difference between force and violence. This is slide number 68. Force actually means the capacity to do work or cause physical change. Force is energy, strength, or active power. It's the capacity to make change happen, to do something, to create change. We use this every single day in our lives. You use force to pick anything up, to move something across the room. You use force when you speak, just to modulate the air, to create movement, to create force, to create energy. That wave energy in the form of sound. Force is action which is in harmony with morality and natural law because it does not violate others' rights. It is action which one always possesses the right to take, which includes the defense, the active use of defensive action against violence. That is within morality, that is within natural law. If someone is harming you with violence, then you have a right to defend yourself using force against violence. Violence, on the other hand, is always immoral. It is the immoral usage of physical power to coerce, compel, or restrain when you have no right to do such a thing. This is done in an immoral capacity, meaning without right. It is not done within rights, meaning you are initiating it. You are initiating a form of coercion against another. You are starting it. And this is what matters. Who started it is what matters. That's actually the crux of the entire issue, is who started it. Violence is the initiation of coercive action, which is in opposition to morality and natural law because it involves the violation of others' rights. That's the reason that it's immoral. That's the reason that it's in opposition to natural law. Because in taking violence, in exercising violence, you are violating someone else's rights. Rights have to be violated for violence to have taken place. And violence, as a result, is action which one never possesses the right to take. The right to take violence is never there. It's never present. You never have the right to take violence, to exercise violence against someone else. And what matters is who started it. We're hammered in this notion that if a physical altercation takes place, that it doesn't matter who started it. And I would suggest that is absolutely, completely wrong. That is total brainwashing. And there is no truth to that, because all that matters is who started it. Because the person who started it initiated coercive action against another person. And the person who responded with force was defending their right to remain unharmed. So, I'll give an example. A couple walks out onto a street from their home. Let's say they're going to walk to a restaurant and have dinner. And a mugger stops them with a switchblade knife and demands all their valuables. Says, give me all your possessions. I want your wallet. I want your purse. I want your jewelry. I want your shoes, etc. Whatever they have. I want your rings. Everything that you have on you. All your money, etc. Now, that person initiated coercive action against this couple. They started the violence. That was an act of violence. You are initiating coercive action, okay, which is the immoral use of physical power to coerce, compel, or restrain. It involves the violation of their rights. They have a right to remain unharmed in their person and to keep their property which they acquired rightfully. And therefore, that person has no right to take that action. If, let's say, the woman reaches into her purse and pulls out a 9mm handgun and blows this guy away, that was not an act of violence. That was an act of self-defensive force that she has a right to take. Now, people will say, well, going right to that might be overkill, might be too much. And I would say that's within the right of the person that this event is happening to. If they want to take that action right off the bat, they have a right to do that. I would say you could ask someone who's doing violent action like that one time to stop, to desist from doing it. And if they refuse, then I would say you have a right to take whatever amount of force you feel is necessary to put them down, including deadly force. And the people who don't understand that don't understand the difference between force and violence and don't understand rights. They don't understand what rights are. And anyone who would say that that person used violence to counter violence doesn't understand. That would not be violence. That would be the defensive use of force in a capacity of right. They're using a right that they have to defend themselves with force if they come under attack by violence. So only one instance of violence would have occurred in that whole situation. And that was the person who started the altercation by brandishing a weapon and telling someone, if you don't do what I tell you, if you don't, your will doesn't conform to my will, which is coercion, then I'm going to hurt you physically. That threat is an act of violence those people have a right to put down and to stop with whatever amount of physical force is required to stop it, up to and including deadly force. They don't need to call a cop. They don't need to file a report. They have a right to take action. And this is how people are brainwashed. They don't understand this. Another example that I like to give is boxing. You ask people, and this highlights the obfuscation in language of how these words are used interchangeably when they're not the same. They're not absolutely not words that should be used interchangeably whatsoever. Okay? They are actually polar opposites. Force and violence are antitheses of each other. They're diametrically opposed concepts. When you use the example of boxing, you ask people, is boxing a violent sport? Most people will say, yes, boxing is a violent sport. How about MMA cage fighting? Like UFC. Is that a violent sport? And people say, oh, yeah, absolutely, that's a violent sport. There's a lot of violence going on in that. Again, it highlights how we obfuscate the actual definitions of words by using a word that has nothing to do with that activity. Thinking, and that by repetition, that gets people to think, oh, that's what violence is. That's not violent behavior. Violence has to involve the violation of someone else's rights. That's why it's called violence. It comes from violation. So I ask people, where is a boxer's rights being violated? Explain to me how either boxer or either UFC fighter is having their rights violated. They agreed to this competition. They are there by an act of their own will. No one is coercing them to put them into the ring. Now, gladiatorial combat back in ancient Rome would have been violence because they were forced to be there. If you threw, people competing in the Roman arena for the, sick entertainment of the crowd and the Roman elite, they were thrown in there against their will and forced to compete. That's violence against them. When people are making a willful decision to do something, it's a mutual decision that both parties agreed to and weren't coerced to do. So they're both in the ring under their own free will, engaged in a competition that involves force, the usage of force. But no violence is taking place in a boxing match. No violence is taking place in a UFC fight. Because the people are there as a result of exercising their own free will. Free will has to be coerced for violence to take place. Violence was done to me and Barb outside of Independence Hall. Our free will was coerced. We were peacefully exercising speech and giving people free information, and then someone violently stopped us, violating our rights, stopped us from proceeding on our way, stopped us from exercising free speech. That's an act of violence. Violence was done unto us because violation of rights took place. That's the difference between force and violence. And when people respond to an act of violence with defensive force, they're not responding with violence. That's what people have to understand. That's not violence, because in doing an act of violence, the perpetrator of that violent act has abandoned their rights. That's the way that someone abandons their right to remain unharmed. When you do violence to someone else, when you initiate violence, you have just abandoned your right to remain unharmed. And therefore, the person you're doing that act of violence to, or anyone else that wants to stop that act of violence, has a right to stop you by whatever amount of force is necessary to stop you from continuing that action. That is a natural, inherent right of every being and cannot be taken away from any being or abdicated to other people just because somebody else thinks they have a monopoly on the usage of force, which is what government is, and police forces are, and militaries are, standing militaries. These are people who think they have a monopoly on the usage of force. And they're not even using force, really. They're using violence to do what they want to do and what they're commanded to do. They're not even using defensive force. They've been turned into violent criminals. The park police that did what they did to us are violent criminals. Whether anyone understands that or not, that's true. That's the case. So, the problem is that people are polarized and either understand only one of the pillars of enlightenment. They don't get them both, and therefore there's no secure structure. There's no stability to the structure, which is why people can still be controlled, misguided. They don't have the full picture. So on slide 69, I bring up these pillars again to explain you can't only get half of the equation. You have to get both. In this instance, it's both and. Okay? You need to understand both the non-aggression principle, which is do not initiate coercive violence against someone else. You have no right to take violent action against someone else. That's the non-aggression principle. Violence is always wrong to initiate. Don't initiate the usage of coercive action, coercion, against someone else, against your fellow beings. And when violence is initiated against someone, there exists the self-defense principle, the right to defend yourself against that initiation of coercion with force, with physical force, which is the sacred masculine principle. And groups of people who are seemingly well-intentioned don't understand one of these principles or another. So moving on to slide number 70, I explained that halfway understanding will not accomplish true freedom. It will not get it done. Halfway understanding of both of these principles will not get it done. So the My Freedom movement, the people who are interested in my freedom, not freedom for everyone, just my freedom. Tea Partiers often fall under this whole thing. So-called patriotic Americans. They understand the self-defense principle. They don't want anybody touching their guns. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. But they leave out the sacred feminine principle of non-aggression and compassion toward others. You know, they look at things in a separate way and don't understand it's about freedom for all. Oh, no, it's our group. We're special because we're Americans. You can't leave out the sacred feminine principle of non-aggression and advocate for policing the world and forcing your way of life on everybody else, and, you know, saying we're going to go and start wars in other countries. They believe in preemptive aggression and support this neocon, you know, usage of the military in many cases. Now, you look at the opposite dynamic of people who get the sacred feminine principle and don't get the sacred masculine principle at all, which again is about what this whole presentation is really about, which is slide 71. The New Age movement leaves out the sacred masculine principles of standing up for one's rights and the inherent right to defend oneself against violence with the defensive use of force. They don't want to ever acknowledge that that exists. They all talk about compassion. They all talk about the sacred feminine principles of non-aggression, the non-aggression principle. But when you want to talk about self-defense, when you're accosted with violence, the New Agers want no part of that. Because again, this is about putting down the sacred masculine. And therefore ultimately destroying the possibility to become enlightened. Because you're not enlightened unless you understand both of those principles. So it boils down to slide number 72. A totalitarian police state is being brought forward faster and faster. And I would say it's not even being brought forward, it's already here. We're in a totalitarian police state. We are in something that is totally akin to Nazi Germany or Soviet Russia. Now. Not coming, but is here already. The occult controllers need to propagate a religion to push people deeper into right-brained imbalance so that they will never stand up for their natural rights. And the New Age movement is that religion. That is the religion of pushing people into right-brained imbalance so that they will not stand up for their natural rights. And will watch this police state take over without resistance.